One essential part of any Mega Man game are the special weapons. They can either be really awesome or just fall flat on your faces. Like in my last countdown, Top 9 Dumbest Boss Ideas, I tackled this topic way back when I was an internet rookie in 2016 on a double top 5. And since I gave Dumbest Boss Ideas another shot, I figured I'd do the same here. Only I'm counting down my least favorite Mega Man weapons this time. Why? Because it would be easier for me to pick apart my least favorite than my favorites. The rules are as following. Only one weapon per game, and I haven't played 9, 10, or 11. So if you're expecting the Thunder Woo to be on here, then tough luck. While I have played 8 and 5 on Game Boy, I won't include any weapons from those games on the list because, to be honest, I haven't really thought deeply on which weapons I would consider in those games to be bad. Aside from that, any weapons from Mega Man 1 through 7 as well as weapons from Mega Man and Base are fair game for this list. But enough talk, let's just start this countdown. Wow, already first entry and I can already sense the presence of an angry mob. Yes, I'm not into the spread drill. How does this weapon work? Basically, you shoot out a slow moving drill that descends. However, with the use of the fire button, you can not only split it once, but twice. But here's why this weapon is on the list. To me, every single weapon in the game is more useful than this. And as a result, I rarely used it. It doesn't help that the weapon gets weaker every time you split it apart. The spread drill is not a bad weapon per se, but it's still a kind of forgettable weapon for me, and I personally think almost every other weapon in Mega Man Base surpasses it. I might use it regularly someday, but as of now, it's on here, albeit on the bottom of this list. Now with the only situational weapon out of the way, time to get into the ones that just suck. And to start off, let's go back to the first Mega Man. When the words the first Mega Man and bad Mega Man special weapons are thrown into a blender, people usually think of the Super Arm. And yeah, it's situational, but I can call it the worst weapon in the game, where a weapon like the Hyper Bomb exists in the same game. Don't let the name fool you, because to quote Aero Dragon 2, the Hyper Bomb is definitely a bomb, but anything but hyper. In fact, it's the total opposite. You throw, well, a bomb, but it doesn't detonate on contact and it takes forever to detonate. Honestly, this weapon only works wonders to enemies that are stationary, but good luck finding one because rarely any of the enemies from the first Mega Man stand still. Yes, you can use the Ice Slasher to make them stationary. But be real here, why would you want to Ice Slash an enemy and then go Hyper Bomb on them when 3 of the other weapons in the game and even the Mega Buster does the same thing but better and quicker? I got nothing else to trash talk about this weapon. So next! Hey, remember the Skull Barrier? One of the weapons from my original list? Yeah, I'm just going to say this right now. All the weapons that were on my original least favorite weapons list will be back for this list, as I still think they're the worst in their respective games. But before we talk about those, let's talk about the Skull Barrier first. What's so bad about this weapon? Well, simply put, it's a shield weapon. Now, shield weapons can work when done right. I mean, the Junk Shield was one of my favorite weapons in the Mega Man series, and it started the trend that not all shield weapons are bad as long as they are done right. But this is Mega Man 4, and at this point, shield weapons are the most useful weapon in the series. But this particular shield has other problems. Basically, you can't toss it at enemies, meaning, and I quote Aero Dragon 2 again, you have to ram yourself into enemies with it, which can be potentially dangerous. Is it any wonder why this shield is designed after skulls, aside from being the weapon you get after the Royal Master that is literally made out of bones? Before you bring up the rock shields and the up and downs and how the Skull Barrier works effective against them, you're right, it is effective against them. But why would you want to use the Skull Barrier to protect yourselves from them when you can use the Flash Stopper to freeze everything instead? This isn't the worst shield weapon in this series, however, and I think a majority of you will know what it is. But before we get to that shield weapon, let's talk about the next weapon on the list, and it's not a shield weapon either. You know, Mega Man 3's weapon selection is actually really good for the most part, but the top spin is not one of those weapons. This weapon suffers the same problem as the Skull Barrier, as it can potentially put your life at risk, but here's how it works differently. Unlike the Skull Barrier, and by extension most weapons in the Mega Man series, the top spin only works when in the air. Not to mention it's very short range too, meaning that like I said before, it can potentially put your life at risk. However, I would give credit where credit is due, because there are some parts of Mega Man 3 where the top spin can be proved useful and actually fun to use at the same time. For example, any airborne enemies or enemies that like to hop around that gets destroyed in one hit, the top spin works wonders on them. Not to mention, it has the power to one-shot Gamma. So in conclusion, while the top spin is not a very good weapon, at the same time, I wouldn't call it abysmal or anything. I've said this in my Mega Man 6 review and I'll say it again here. The plant barrier is a piece of crap. For starters, some of the weapons in Mega Man 6 have the fatal flaw of limited uses. As for the plant barrier, you can only use it 7 times. What the heck? I know I should also complain about the Centaur Flash for having the same problem and the fact that it can only damage one boss in the entire game. While the plant barrier does do damage to Tomahawk Man and the Fortress bosses, but at least the Centaur's Flash is more effective, unlike the plant barrier. Just like the Skull Barrier, you cannot toss the plant barrier. But at least you get to use the Skull Barrier 14 times, which is twice the amount of uses for the plant barrier. Now, between this and the Skull Barrier, shield weapons that you cannot toss can also work. I mean, look how effective the Acid Barrier from 11 is. But then again, the Plant Barrier is a pre-Mega Man 7 shield weapon, and to be honest, I don't think anyone expected anything except a subpar shield weapon like that. Yes, many enemies die in one shot from it, and it can be proven useful in stages with descending enemies like in Centaur Man stage, but chances are, by the time you reach the second half of the stage, you've already used it all up in the first half. I've already agreed with Arrow Dragon 2 on my original list, and I'll agree with him again here. This weapon is nothing more than a weed, and it looks like that there's things that both Arrow and I agree with. I bring this up because the next entry is an example of something that I disagree with Arrow on. Yes, I said it. I'm not big on the danger wrap. Why? Well, it suffers the same problems as some of the weapons previous on this list. It's way too situational for me. How this weapon works is that you encase an enemy in a bubble with a bomb inside, and it will explode when it either hits an enemy or explode by itself in a certain amount of time. The problem with it is that, like the spread drill, every other weapon in Mega Man 7 does the same thing with destroying enemies in one hit but better. Okay, maybe not all of them, but definitely most of them. Not to mention the weapon is only suitable for small enemies, so using the danger wrap against medium-sized or large enemies does absolutely squat to them. Well, at least you can use it to humiliate Clownman in the most hilarious way possible, but even still, if you like this weapon, that's fine, but personally, I don't really like it. Now before you bring up the alternative way of using it where you hold down the fire button to pop the bubble and drop the bomb onto the ground, I know that, but I didn't know how to execute it until now. Besides, I don't think the popping bubble method would make this weapon better for me. Okay, maybe slightly, but still not enough for me to call the danger wrap one of the best weapon in the series. I've said this to Capcom in my original list and I'll say it again here. Does the charge kick really need to exist? What made you think this weapon would be a good idea? For those who haven't played Mega Man 5, let me describe this weapon in a nutshell. It's a weaponized version of the slide maneuver. This wouldn't be too bad except it's so awkward to execute, because any action you perform with any weapon requires a fire button. Here, you can't use the fire button, you have to slide. This may not sound too hard to do, but when trying it out for the first time, it's the equivalent of playing a game where B is a jump button instead of A. It completely breaks the formula of how a special weapon is normally executed in a Mega Man game, not to mention it only works on enemies that are fully stationed on the ground. The only two things that keeps this from being number 1 is A, it can make you invincible to some enemies, and B, it actually deals damage, unlike number 1. And just by that description, you probably know what number 1 is. So, it has been 3 years since I ranted on Mega Man 2's infamous Time Stopper weapon. So I'm just going to cover a chase. Number 1 is the Time Stopper. Again, I honestly don't know what Capcom was thinking when they made this weapon. Oh wait, I do. So in actuality, I honestly don't know how Capcom could do something as simple as making a weapon that can freeze time and butcher it so horribly. As the name suggests, this weapon freezes time and everything around it. That may sound awesome if it wasn't for a few flaws. You can't change weapons or even shoot while it's up, it doesn't kill anything, and by the time it wears out, it runs out too. The only thing that the weapon is weak to is Quick Match, but even still, it only wipes out half his health bar. Okay, I'll admit I was a bit too harsh on this weapon in my original list because there are certain areas in Mega Man 2 where it can be useful, but does that make it good? No. After we got this weapon, what did we get in the later games? We've got weapons similar to the Time Stopper, like the Flash Stopper from Mega Man 4, the Gravity Hole from Mega Man 5, and the Centaur Flash from Mega Man 6. All of which are better than the Time Stopper. I guess I should be thankful for the Time Stopper's existence because without it, we wouldn't have all these screen nuke weapons like the ones I just mentioned. But just because it was the first screen nuke weapon doesn't mean it's good, and it doesn't save it from being my least favorite weapon in the Mega Man games. I am Ron and KMO185, and I really need to cover a much more positive topic in my next countdown.